Yeah, me neither.
Dan, just jumping in for a second, we might have lost your audio, sir, I'm afraid. I could sense you're on a roll. Didn't want to stop you. So I'll just give it 1 minute, everybody, just to get audio back in live. As always, a live YouTube session. Not quite yet, Dan. So bear with us, everybody. We'll just as always, not quite yet done. Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll get kick-started, and we'll let Dan sort out his audio for a second. So thanks, everybody. Welcome to our Tech Talk. We've got a good active session today, and what I'd like to do is just take a second just to have our speakers introduce themselves. And so what I'd like to do is actually, Bill, would you like to do a quick introduction, please?
Hello, my name is Bill Murray. I'm a senior researcher at the Leading Edge Forum. And my research interest for the last couple of years has been platform organizations and businesses. And today, what I'd like to do is to begin to open that out in the context of the Tech Talk and show how these information markets that we're talking about more and more are central to the way they work.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Dan, I think we've got your audio back as well.
My back. That's awesome.
You're
My
back.
apologies. Thanks for taking this. So, Carl, please introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, certainly. So, Carl Kinson, Chief Architect for DXC and Honored Distinguished Architect as well for the company. I look at digital transformation across our clients and also DXC in terms of how we transform ourselves from a people, process, and technology point of view.
That's awesome. And Glenn Robinson.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, Glenn here. I'm a Emerging Technology Director. I work in the LEF. I lead our 21st Century Human practice. I'm also a Distinguished Engineer for DXC Technology. And it's great to be here.
Thank you. So, we're going live today with our Tech Talk. I want to move to the next slide, please, Hejin. And one of the things I want to remind everyone is that we're in a very open forum here. So we are public and live on the internet. And so anyone from DXC or other companies, right, who are participating, please recognize that as we do both this Tech Talk, but also broader, the crowd chat that follows it, which is an integrated social conversation that we have across multiple social media platforms that allows us to actually align conversations into time series logic while using the full expression and capability of a wide variety of social platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So I'll ask you all to just keep in the back of your mind, this is a public and open forum, and so we're going to have a bit of fun and push the limits of that for sure, but I wanted to remind everyone. So we will be moving, and you can go there immediately now, crowdchat.net/DXC Tech Talk, and actually begin to participate in the conversation, even ask questions. You could also ask them directly through the chat window or social media. If you'd like to, at DXC Technology on Twitter. That said, what I'd like to do is kind of move us into the topic a little bit. What we're really seeing happen in the digital space is we're beginning to see OT, or operating technology, give way to the new digital IT. If digital is defined as the model for execution around an information-driven business, then all of a sudden what we begin to recognize is that visibility is a really important piece, but as is rate, pace, and managing your technical debt. And so as we see a lot of companies move into their digital initiative, we're seeing a really big shift, right? So we're starting at the top of the company with a much more unified digital strategy that's driven by the kinds of information services that can be unlocked by the business. We then move to the business unit vice presidents, who I'll begin to move into component pieces, bringing their information and their capability and their assets right into a much more consistent digital operating model. The goal, right, of the business unit is to really invest in differentiation. And that really leaves, an anti-pattern to that, which is, or a contrast to that, which is stop focusing your vital efforts and your vital treasure on areas that are undifferentiated. That's beginning to emerge a new set of IT strategies that are bringing what I'll call digital platforms. These are really provided by global scale cloud providers and software as a service firms that are beginning to anchor and bring new platforms forward that you can merely build on. You don't have to worry about operating. You don't have to really worry about managing. That fundamentally what they do is allow a much higher order of business consumption through self-service semantics. And as such, IT is fundamentally being reset. Being reset in the areas of really getting to business self-service, right? I shouldn't have to raise a ticket. I should just be able to use, and I should be able to craft my own business processes across a set of information flows to complete and create an outcome. I should be able to develop code at an incredible pace with automated, with our favorite robot named Jenkins, right? Who is naturally provisioning the asset and testing it for us to provide us high cycle rates on new service development. And certainly we're changing the way that employees actually interact with one another, whether they are setting up collaboration in teams just in time, or whether they're setting up sharing environments and even code bases and listeners and subscribers to a wide variety of feeds that allow them to do their business differently, always find the right person more quickly, establish collaborations both inside and outside the firm with appropriate information protection. These are things in which we have to allow the employees to actually give them the controls to set those up, because what we're trying to do across all these categories is really put an exponent on the performance of an individual, create scale. So we've heard about the ephemeral 10x engineers, right? What we recognize is that a big piece of that exponent is not just the skills and knowledge of that individual, but it's the environments in which they operate. And those environments are these new digital core platforms. And then DXC also sees that as we begin to integrate the new business onto the old business, that we actually need to think differently about how we use analytics and automation and lean strategies to allow the integration of hybrid IT. The new digital platforms integrated with the more traditional business to make sure that all of the information is online all the time and is available for service-based composition. So these are the things that are changing in the business that we're seeing. And I think what you begin to see is that any time that I begin to move into an IoT application or machine learning application or next-gen mobile app development or even chatbots for CX, we begin to recognize that they begin to intersect the business very robustly. And when that begins to happen, we're forcing IT to change at a rate that they haven't expected to. But we also recognize that we don't want to put a huge amount of extra money into those legacy systems. So these new digital platforms are really changing the economics of bringing information forward. So as we move on to the next slide, I don't want this to be slides. I want this to be discussion. So if anyone has anything they want to add in, please do. But we are beginning to see that, on the far right is kind of more traditional IT, right? Very well known and well described. And on the left are these ideation-based businesses. And what we do know is that there are a set of patterns that are emerging around how companies executing with digital are beginning to grow from their first digital projects, right, to multiple digital projects in the beginnings of a digital commons, usually managed environments like GitHub and some kind of a developer cloud that's out there that's auto building, whether you're using Travis CI or Jenkins or a mix of the two, Cucumber, all the other development tools. They're beginning to accumulate technical debt within the company. Hopefully, we begin to unlock information through APIs and processes, and then we begin to emerge the digital platforms underneath what is really becoming a platform-based business. So you begin to expose APIs, and all of a sudden you recognize I now have a composable set of services within the business. This begins to turn you into the likes of Amazon and Amazon.com, Netflix, and others, in which all business units use a shared set of APIs and a shared set of information underneath them to deliver brand new services based upon the business. And so this is really what we're seeing.
And it's interesting you mentioned Amazon there. They're an organization that we study and work with, and indeed I worked for many years. And if you think about the effects of automation and APIs, as you've just described, that drove the whole sort of first wave of change that we're seeing on this slide. But I think that the bigger one that those organizations are right in the middle of and really maximizing the opportunity of right now is the one that AI and ML is bringing in. And that's a whole next wave of shift that we see occur, and is going to be a lot more disruptive. And yet most of the organizations that we work with are still trying to grapple with the automation and opening up opaque sets of data through APIs, and they got this much bigger challenge ahead. It's
no question. I mean, we're going to start talking about the post-cloud era, right? I mean, we're going to start to take these platforms, take these platforms for granted, right? It's like, why don't you have a digital platform? Because if you don't have a digital platform, then you're not going to be able to use AI and machine learning to actually capture the knowledge-based economy, right? That's already moving forward. To your point, we've moved from those first-order information businesses, right? As we saw, paper-based news move to internet-based news. As we saw, the Uberization, right, of transportation, right? But as we begin to move into clinical healthcare, right, which is driven by clinical digital assistants and all those other models, right? We are beginning to see the emergence of the autonomous knowledge-based economy, and that's going to be really interesting.
Dan, one of the things we spoke about earlier on was the visibility lens regarding these environments. So the digital projects and the beachhead is becoming high visibility at the business level, and the challenge that we see in the traditional core being sat in the what it should be information technology, but more infrastructure technology type dynamic. Just wondering if you put a lens on that a little bit in terms of how we see that manifesting within the business, with that relationship between business and IT moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. As a technical firm and IT in general intersects with the business, one of the things we really have to understand is, what does the business really value in this new platform-based economy? If platform is the new table stakes, and you fundamentally want the platform, the digital platform that underpins, right, the business to become very invisible, and by invisible, really taken for granted. On the flip side, what starts to happen is the business really is looking for business-based outcomes, right? Help me to launch my new digital product or service. Help me to change the way that I actually service an asset in the field. Help me to find a way to hire an employee just in time, and indoctrinate them and pay them without any manual processes and capabilities, so that I can literally do it in days. I was talking with a firm who does tax accounting, and they have a problem in that they actually expand their workforce by more than 30% for 3 months. The problem is that the on-ramp for that 30% of their workforce actually takes them 2 months. And they'd love to have that be truly just-in-time, same-day capability, but they're not there yet with respect to the integration of their paper-based and people-based processes to take advantage of it, much less, to Glenn's point, of really using knowledge to figure out, right, which are the people that I really want to on-ramp to do this business, because they fundamentally are going to have better outcomes than others, right, which will be the next generation of that. But first thing I have to do is have the information. Unless I have the information, I really can't reason on it. Right. So, we are certainly seeing that business visible work is out there. When we talk about business visible, what we're really talking about is differentiated business experiences. And by differentiated, that's really pushing you away from the table stakes and forward into more custom engineered capabilities for the business.
So Dan, we've got lots of ways of generating new data. We've got lots of ways of capturing and talking to data. We've got lots of ways of analyzing and processing. And then we've got lots of ways of presenting that information back to the management, the business, or the machines to react to. So it sort of feels like our clients and everybody needs to have a good information strategy and understanding the value of that information, where it comes from, how you process it accordingly, and how you respond to it in the right way.
Absolutely agree, and I still think the underpinning, right, and I'm going to move over to Bill Murray here. I think that what we are seeing is the emergence of these platform-based businesses, where businesses are recognizing that concern, right, of providing information services that actually allow for the reconstitution of the business in a fully digital basis, where organizational boundaries mean less than team capability. is really taking hold. So maybe, Hejin, if you can move to the next slide, I'll let Bill talk about some of his recent research, right, in the area of platform organizations.
Thank you. So the really neat phrase I want to latch on here is platform-based economy. We are hearing more and more of that, whether it's digital platforms, platform organizations. And very quickly, what I want to do is just put a little frame around this term platform business, because these are the ones that are just accelerating the growth of information markets more than any other kind of business model. We've just released a liberating platforms report, and it's different. It's focused on traditional existing organizations. These are not digital natives. These are the vast majority of businesses out there that have to compete with the digital natives. I was recently involved in a platforms masterclass the week before last. We had a traditional healthcare business. We had government people in there. We had defense firms in there, building platform organizations. Last week, I was with an automotive company, a BPO provider, and an insurance provider. So I just want to quickly take you through, very, very quickly, just some of the fundamental aspects of a platform business, and then hand it back to the guys, because this is the mechanics that's creating these information markets. So first of all, it needs an absolute ton of connections. I'm going to use a real example here, and not the classic Amazon example. I'm going to choose the other one. I'm going to choose Alibaba. Alibaba has 1 billion connections. A billion. There's only 7.2 billion people on the planet. A B2B business. How can you have a billion? It's got a billion connections. So it controls the means of connection, not the means of production, the means of connection. And if you have to have enough, because that can make or break a platform. Secondly, it aggregates really well, supply side and demand side. There are 500 million active consumers and 10 million small businesses alone on Alibaba, all right? That requires some trust. You really have to get the trust up in those connections. I mean, look at the other big platform out there that's losing trust at the moment. What's trust based on nowadays when you can't see the other person? Information, right? This term ecosystem. Let me give you an idea of the size of some of the biggest ecosystems. We've just had an event in Asia called 11/11. It's 20 times the size of Amazon Prime Day, 20 times the size of it. Now, you have to know everything that's going on in that ecosystem. You're the conductor of an orchestra. If something's going off, you need to deal with it. How do you do that? You have to be right on top of information. You have to be so good at managing information, getting it moving around, getting it fluid, okay? It has these things called network effects. The more on the supply, the more on the demand. The more on the demand, the more on the supply. But they're very fragile. If you don't keep an eye on them, again, through information, they'll decay, they'll bring the whole business down. Nearly there. All platform organizations make life easier. They remove frictions. Alibaba, for example, is installing sensors in small 2-3 person stores to monitor foot traffic and to create camera-generated heat maps to show where customers are spending their time. Makes life really easy for them. Again, managing the information exhaust, putting it through flywheels, getting insights out of it. Dealing with that friction or removing it is, again, a make or break. And finally, sides. They used to have 2. Now they've got way more. There's a phrase we call the iron triangle. 3 sides of a platform: e-commerce, logistics, and finance. Most platforms now need 3 sides, and you had better be on top of the information. So that's it, really. That's kind of the 6 aspects of platform organizations. And I guess, my point is this. That was a real example I gave you. And Alibaba and Amazon and so forth, these are just world-class at creating information and data fluidity in their ecosystems. Okay, guys?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Bill. And what's interesting is now watching the non-mega players get into the act, right? Number of global telecommunications firms, right, are beginning to fundamentally change their networks with increased visibility that's giving them, optimization control and new service production capability. We've got healthcare institutions beginning to really change the extended treatment capabilities for patients to create outcome and wellness, right? Even patients like me like models. And I know that in our Horizons paper, right, Femila Dega and Dr. Waugh actually talk, a lot about information gravity, but also of reducing the information of, reducing the friction on the value of the information, right? The information flow. Because those are big issues for them, and also time value decay of the value of information, which is, the longer you sit on something, the less it may be worth, right? And all because you can't make the decision in a timely fashion. And it kind of harkens me back, and maybe you guys can talk about this, to the days of the financial services marketplace in the late 90s, early 2000s, where we saw the first electronic exchanges begin to emerge, and we had the mad rush to everybody being within, a hundredth of a millisecond of the feeds in Canary Wharf and in New York for Reuters. Those models that moved with the first generation of algorithmic trading towards replacing the people that were carrying around sheets of Post-it notes.
But interestingly, Dan, in that, and stepping into maybe the next topic, is the design of those systems and how they operate today has actually created a lot of the legacy, where we've got so many disconnected, disparate systems that we've got the hand-holding process between system A and system B.
You're for sure right, Carl. So let's dig into that one. But the parallels, it's always great sometimes to be a historian and look back and say, hey, the last time we really saw this kind of a discussion is the one that Bill just put forward, although it was very specific to a marketplace, was back then. What we are seeing, Carl, and what I like for you to talk to us about is, right, how are companies actually dealing with, building these businesses, right? Because it's really, you cannot afford, right, a 3-year, project plan and the potential of a failure after 3 years of hitting the mark, right? So, but at the same time, you can accumulate a massive amount of technical debt if your organization continues to work in that, in a disparate and non-collaborative style. So how are you seeing companies successfully kind of deploy these platform-based business strategies, right, forward into their business operations?
Right, absolutely, Dan. And I think this is, for me, for me, it's the passion bit and the critical part that I love, which is how do we make sure that what we're talking to, and we talk to our clients about the platforms of the future, how do we actually make sure they don't fall into the same problem that, over the last 20 years, we've found ourselves with these legacy environments that have sat there and we can't change. What's really interesting is that I think many of the organizations, everybody out there, has already sort of made the pivot that there's a new way of developing and operating systems. And we very much look at the DevOps model as the marketing terms, in terms of, how do we develop and operate our systems much more closely together? How do we create high performing teams? How do we iterate and get development of our platforms out quicker? But actually, there's a bit up front that's come really important. There's a resurgence around design thinking, and how do we think about the user interface and the experience that needs to be created? What's the business need that we need to think about before we step straight into that engineering activity? Right. The challenge today is that how do you make sure that design thinking and then the architecture thinking doesn't hold back the engineering and development community? How does it operate at speed? And that means that we need to think about new architecture frameworks. We need to be much more agile in our processes, and we need to make sure that we're iterating all the way through this cycle. If we actually think about the platform itself, we need to apply some new architecture methodologies. We need to think about stuff like domain-driven design, microservices, loosely coupled-based architecture principles. So we enable that API economy within our ecosystem. And what we don't end up doing is we don't design for the end 3-year state, because by the time we get there, everything will have moved anyway. We want our design process to be just ahead of our development process. And as we step into development, all of the practices that we see being talked about today in the marketplace come to fruition. So the fact that we need to make sure that we've got small, high-performing teams operating to a set of sprints, to a set of program increments that they can actually then execute on a 2, 4, 5, 6 week basis, start to show value very quickly. We push that through automated testing processes. We push that through high collaborative code systems so that we make sure the code is central and common to all parties. And then we use metrics to make sure that we understand the accuracy and the capacity of our development teams so that we can tune the workload to them on a more common basis.
Give me an example of some of these development metrics, right? So how are you seeing companies begin to kind of emerge their metrification of how well are my teams running?
Yeah, I mean, a very simple one is around literally sprint burn down. So if we look at the fact of a performing team, we'll have a set of number of people in there, a product owner, a scrum master, a developer, an engineer, and a tester. They will effectively have a set of sprint activities that will be defined to them by a product owner and a portfolio manager. They will actually log their time within the system. So something like Trello, Jira, or something else where it's able to capture the amount of work effort. And then that can be gauged against the amount of code output that comes out. So we can start to see, through GitHub and through code repositories, how many pull requests and how many changes have been made to code. We can then see through the validation of testing and successful testing, how many times code is accepted and pushed through into the deployment pipeline. So you can start to use the systems as a good metric against the success of the team. And it is a team, and we have to make sure that those outputs are captured.
No, I think that's critical. I mean, really, what we're talking about broadly, and maybe this can push into to Glenn, right? We're seeing the collection of a much wider variety of data, right, around the core processes of the enterprise. One of the reasons I hear companies talk about moving to platforms is that many of the modern platforms actually throw off a lot more log data, right, than their proprietary on-premise brethren. And as such, they really pick up the ability to be analyzed because the data exists. But as we move into the people-based business, right, people-based data gets harder and harder to find. How are you seeing, Glenn, kind of the emergence of these digital humans? How are people participating now in this analytically rich environment, and how are teams being formed, and what are you seeing out there in that digital human practice?
And do you know what? That is such the question, right? So businesses are built on people, and what Carl just described is absolutely the endpoint. But if you just unpick an organization slightly, you'll find a small amount of people immersed in the sorts of things and world, and have a knowledge and understanding of the economics that Bill described, the technology platforms that are required, all the things we've discussed, that there'll be a tiny subset of an organization.
Trust. Think about trust. I mean, wow.
Right, exactly, right. So you've got some people, you've got a very small number of people with a high level of understanding of what we're talking about. And then you've got the rest of the business. And many of them will sit in IT, but they're not involved on a daily basis in these sorts of things. So what we're observing is that there's a standard set of capabilities. We've created this 8-part model called the Matrix Mindset, which if you're not day-to-day working in this world, you still need a vast familiarization with the economics of these new platform business models that Bill described. You'll need an understanding of integration and data and the risk of data as it flows between and through systems, the veracity, the trust of that data. We see so many people who just trust the information they're given. Here's a report, here's some statistics. There you go, we're going to make a decision based on that. They never stop and think, well, actually, where did this data come from? How can we trust this data all the way back to its source? Yeah. How do we know? All these sort of
lineage and provenance, big issues.
Exactly. And then we're talking about, moving into a world that leverages AI and deep learning, where we're potentially going to use these same habits and these same design principles to feed data, opaque data, possibly untrusted data, into AI that's going to be incredibly biased. It's going to have all sorts of potential impacts on organizations. So brand impact, our reputation, trust. Dan, I mean, you nailed it there. Trust with our customers. Why should they protect us? Well, why should they give us their business if we're not showing, and this is across our organization, not just within IT, if we're not showing a fundamental understanding of the digital age around trust, risk, economics, all the things we have in our sort of 8-part models. It's a general set of capabilities we think that are mostly lacking.
Where would you put ethics? Would you put ethics with trust?
Absolutely. Well, so actually, so it depends what type of it's a great question, because it depends what type of organization you are. Frankly, there are some organizations, without naming them, that are masters at at the platform business model, but ethically, you'd have to really question how they're treating some of the producers of the value that those platforms are orchestrating. So when Bill talks about that orchestration, that's the role they're at. Are they doing it ethically? When we work with UK government, which we do a lot, they are completely mindful of the ethics. They're thinking about the ethics of the data creation, the data handling, and the data orchestration, which is the role they can provide. So ethics, depending on your business model, can and probably should play a big role. But hey, you know, it just depends on the outcome you're looking for. More money, or do you want to build trust and orchestrate a bunch of trusted third parties?
Well, hopefully they both move together, and going forward, that's certainly what our risk research is beginning to show us for a lot of companies. So I agree. I mean, high ethical standards yield trust and yield, and very often it gives you more operating freedom. So it's very interesting circle that we're beginning to see emerge. So I'm cognizant of time. We are at the half hour, and one of the things I'd like to do is kind of bring everyone over to crowdchat.net/DXC Tech Talk, and we will go until the conversation ends. Talking about some of these issues of how do we do platforms? How do we value platforms? How are the processes changing, and how are people interacting in the new processes? We might even want to talk about skills, because with the post-cloud economy, right, the people who are able to compose with information, right, on higher order in a higher order domain, right, become very interesting. But there's also a huge amount of value for what we'll call the utility providers, right, to continue to run Lean Sigma, right, or Lean and Six Sigma against the operational data to get those extra 2 or 3 points of operating margin out of a basis. So a lot of really interesting things happen. I really want to appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Bill, Carl, and Glenn, for joining me today. And let's go over to CrowdChat and continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.